The International Monetary Fund has trimmed its forecast for global growth this year as nations struggle to contain the Delta variant of the coronavirus. The unequal distribution of vaccines, though, means some countries will recover from the pandemic faster than those without sufficient jabs to inoculate their populations. Paolo Montecillo has more.
The world's recovery from the pandemic has lost a bit of steam. According to the IMF, nations are struggling to contain the coronavirus Delta variant due to the uneven distribution of vaccines.
The foremost priority is to vaccinate the world. Much greater multilateral action is needed to vaccinate at least 40% of the population in every country by the end of this year and 70% by the middle of next year.
The IMF says the global economy will grow 5.9% this year. That's a tenth of a percentage point lower than its projection in July. The lender has kept its forecast for next year steady, saying the expansion will slow to 4.9%. The modest adjustments hide the widening gap between rich nations, which are on track to fully recover from the pandemic by next year, and developing economies, which will have to wait till after 2024.
One of the major risks remains that there could be new variants of the virus that could further slow back the recovery. We're seeing major supply disruptions around the world that are also feeding inflationary pressures, which are quite high. And financial risk-taking also is increasing, which poses an additional risk to the outlook.
The projections were released just after the IMF's executive board exonerated Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva. She was accused of rigging data in favor of China in the World Bank's 2018 Ease of Doing Business report during her time at the lender. Georgieva has the support of China and the EU, while Japan and the US are more skeptical. Washington says the investigation raises legitimate concerns and has called on the IMF to ensure transparency as Georgieva stays in charge. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
To break down some of these numbers for us, let's go to Reginald Kadzutu. He's the CEO of fund management firm Amana Capital Limited. Reginald, thank you for your time. The IMF report is forecasting that developing countries will have to wait 2 years longer than the developed world with regards to enjoying the spoils of a post-pandemic recovery. Give us a sense of what that will actually look like. In human terms, what does that mean for the developing world?
Thank you, Melinda. Yes, because of the unequal sharing of vaccines globally, or should I say, the lag of developing countries in the ability to generate or create their own vaccines or manufacture their own vaccines, they are reliant on vaccines that have come from the West, meaning that their rate of vaccinating their population is dependent on how fast they can secure whatever is coming from the West. And it has not been coming that frequently. So you find for most of like sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or low-income countries, vaccination rates are around 5% to 8% of the population. So without a majority of the population vaccinated, then you find low-income countries are finding it difficult to remove the restrictions that stop the spread or the more harder effects of COVID on their economies. So they, for example, most countries are still in curfews. That means operating from like 4 a.m. to 9 p.m., 8 p.m. That means you have hit out the whole night economy, you have hit out all the entertainment economy, the transport sector. Some places still have hard lockdowns between cities. That means you have hit intercity trade internally, which is affecting domestic consumption and also the supply chain. So basically the transport sector.
Reginald,
So
can I ask you, when we say that it's going to take these developing countries 2 years longer, is that the best case estimate, or do you think some countries are going to still be struggling for a lot longer than that?
I think countries will be struggling for a lot longer than that. Why do I think so? If you look at the fiscal space or the macroeconomic fabric of most countries that have come out of 2020, their fiscal space or headroom has drastically shrunk. You have countries where debt repayment is taking close to 60-70% of all revenue earned. So what the pandemic did was worsen the debt situation in most African countries. So if they cannot get relief on debt or get restructuring on debt post 2021, then most developing countries will not even come out of this pandemic because their major threat right now is the debt level, which is contracting the fiscal headroom that they would need then to pump in money, whether through fiscal quantitative easing in their economies, but most of their revenue right now is going to paying debt. So 2 years is even a best case. It's not even the best case. Base case, I would put it to 3 to 5 years for African communities to start recovering.
It's a long time. We've covered some of the bad news. Any positives to come out for this? Any good news stories that stood out in this IMF report?
Uh, oof, it's very hard to pick out from the IMF report. Okay, for once, at least the developing economies are going to start growing faster, which still does not spell good news for the developing economies. Because if the developed guys are growing faster and generating better returns on their side, then you'll find FDI flow and portfolio flows to developing countries also reduces. The threat of inflation, because of all, as much as they say it's transitionary, we believe all the quantitative easing they've been doing, the social support they've been doing, is what is coming to bite and not really supply chain disruption. And all that money in the US, which is causing inflation, you'll realize also causes a problem for African or developing countries because commodity prices start going up. And most of these countries are net commodity importers. So it's very hard to find any good news from the report that was given. On an economic perspective, I think developing countries have yet to see the full impact of what COVID actually has done to their economy.
Certainly a tale of two very distinct economic recoveries there. Reginald Kadzutu joining us from Amana Capital Limited. Thanks for your time.